Hello, today I'm going to be going over brain anatomy for Lab 9. So to begin, the parts of the brain, we have the superior part, the inferior part, the anterior part, and the posterior part of the brain. As we look at the inferior part of the brain, we see the cerebellum, which coordinates movement, this part right here. Then above the cerebellum, we have the brainstem. The most inferior part of the brainstem is the medulla oblongata. Above the medulla oblongata, we have the pons. And above the pons, we have the midbrain. Now looking at the cerebral hemispheres, we have these elevated parts that are called gyri. They're like hills, so they're nice and elevated. And then these creases, like valleys, if you were to compare hills and valleys, we have the sulci. So the creases are the sulci, the elevated parts are the gyri. Next we have the longitudinal fissure, which splits the brain in half, basically, and for kind of a better definition of the longitudinal fissure, it divides the sides of the brain or the hemispheres of the brain into the left and right hemisphere. Next, we have the lateral fissure, which separates the temporal lobe from the frontal lobe and parietal lobe as well, right here. We also have the central sulcus. You can see it better on this side. The central sulcus is right here, this line. And it is in between the precentral gyrus, which I have in red, and the postcentral gyrus, which I have in gold. So the central sulcus is in between the red and gold line. We also have the lobes of the brain. So we have the frontal lobe, we have the parietal lobe, which is like the upper back part. We have the temporal lobe, which is this bottom one right here. Kind of looks like it's hanging off. And then we have the occipital lobe, which is the lower back part. Now going into the functional areas of the brain. We have the primary motor cortex, which is in red. And the primary motor cortex is responsible for planning and executing movement. The premotor cortex, which is this dark pink area right here, is involved in really complex movements. So as well as the cerebellum is involved in coordinating very complex movements as well, but we also have this dark pink area, which is the premotor cortex, which is also involved in very complex movements. Then in silver, we have the prefrontal cortex. I know it's hard to see, the lighting in my house is weird. But we have the prefrontal cortex. And in this location of the brain, we have kind of our personality, how we learn. We have some memory functions in this area as well. Then we have the primary somatosensory cortex in gold right here. And this is in charge of receiving sensory information from the peripheral nervous system. Information from muscles, skin, joints, it all first arrives in the primary somatosensory cortex, which is the gold. Then we have the somatosensory association cortex in this dark purple color. And after information reaches the primary somatosensory cortex, the information comes here for the final decision or the next decision about what's going to happen with that information. Next, we have the primary visual cortex. I did this in black, and this is in the posterior part of the brain. And this is in charge of the simple parts of sight in the occipital lobe. Around, I know you can't see it, but it's a very light pink. We have the visual association area. And this is in charge of the more detailed parts of sight. So we have things like color, movement, depth, those more detailed parts of sight. So the black part, which is the primary visual cortex, is just the simple parts of sight. And the visual association area in light pink, which I know it's tough to see, but it is light pink, is in charge of the more detailed information, color, movement, depth for sight. Then we have the primary auditory cortex, which is in glitter. And the auditory association area, which is in glitter as well, and it's split in half. But there's more to them inside the brain. It may look like a small area, but there's more of the primary auditory cortex and auditory association area, inside of the brain. Then we have Broca's area in this very bright pink area. And Broca's area is in charge of speech. Things like generating words, formation of sentences, general speech is Broca's area in the light pink. Then we have Wernicke's area, which is in the lighter purple over here. There's like dark purple and light purple. The lighter purple is Wernicke's area, and this is in charge of speech comprehension. So, like Dr. Crisp said in her video, if someone were to have a stroke and not understand speech, their Wernicke's area would have been affected. So that is it for my brain anatomy video. I really enjoyed this activity and I enjoyed learning more about the brain. Thank you.